Ever felt like you're supposed to be fearless and then beat yourself up a bit when you fail to meet those expectations? If so, then you are going to love today's episode, where you will get so much permission to feel the fear and learn how to not have it shrink your life. In today's episode, I have the honor to talk to Jen Grosso, who is a well-being expert and performance consultant with over 25 years of experience guiding high-performing teams, executives, entrepreneurs, actors, and athletes. Jen is an international speaker, author, former attorney, and 3 times entrepreneur with a specialty in building stress resilience and well-being in high-pressure industries. Jen and I deep dive into a conversation around fear and then so many other amazing conversations about embracing our humanness, the realities of the digital age, finding balance in life, and just so much more. I so enjoyed the depth of the topics we were able to cover, and she got me thinking about so many things in new ways as well. So I'm sure you're going to find this conversation as enlightening as I did. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Unweaving Chronic Pain podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Moore, founder of the Whole Self Integration Method, and I am here to help you expand your life back out again if you have been struggling with chronic pain and you feel like your life has been shrinking because of it. In fact, I just held a masterclass all about learning how to shift from the shrink response, which is a response that keeps us in the vicious cycle of chronic pain and shrinks our life, and how to shift into the power response, which is one that allows us to step into our personal power and expand our life back out again. And over time, when you use this power response, you'll finally be able to find peace in your body and mind. And most importantly, you'll get to wake up excited to start the day living the life that you've designed for yourself. If you want to get access to a replay of that masterclass, it is available for free for a limited time. So make sure you go ahead, sign up at the link in the show notes before that opportunity slips by. Now, onto the episode. Welcome, Jen. I am so excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you for being here.
I'm so thrilled to be here with you on this podcast. I love it.
Yes. Why don't you start by just telling people a little bit about who you are and what you're up to?
Yeah, so I'm so many things, right? That list of what you are. So I'm a former attorney turned entrepreneur. I've owned a bunch of businesses. My business, we do a lot of consulting. I'm also a former masters athlete. In one of the gyms that I owned, I became a masters athlete and I was competing in that area. And so that was super fun for me. I'm a speaker. I do speaking on many different topics, including some I think we're going to talk about today. I'm an author. I have lots of things in my background that are lots of fun. So
I love that you have so many different things. It's like amazing as someone who have like super ADHD and it's like bounce from thing to thing to thing. It's like whenever I hear of someone who's been in like the same job, they're like, yep, I've worked in the same job for 40 years. I'm like, that gives me so much anxiety.
Yeah, in particular, like the being a lawyer, very few people actually leave the law. It's a very small percentage leave the law. They'll go do things that are related to the law, but very few people do what I did. And when I found out that statistic, I was really surprised. I don't seem to have a problem with switching gears.
Yeah, I love that. And what made you leave law?
It didn't fit. And a few things. Not only did it not fit, but it was starting to not fit in a way that it was impacting my health. It was impacting my health physically, and it was impacting my health emotionally. And I finally sat there one day and said, what am I doing? And I was from a head perspective and a mindset perspective, I had that sunk cost fallacy. Well, I've invested all this time. I've invested all this money. I have to ride this out. And then there was this moment where it clicked. No, I don't. I don't have to continue on a path that is clearly hurting me simply because it didn't turn out to be what I expected to. And I have lots of evidence that it's harming me at the same time.
I love that. I love that you bring up the sunk cost fallacy, because I feel like I very much felt that when leaving the clinic as a physical therapist. I'm like, I still have student loans I'm paying off, but like, I couldn't do it anymore. It was not what was aligned at all.
Yeah. And that can be enough. I mean, there were certainly practical considerations, I'm sure, for you as well.
Oh, yes.
How do I not stress myself out in terms of the money? But once I made the decision, it was easier to then start lining all of that up. When and how can I pay off these bills? How much money do I have? When can this happen? It wasn't the if it was going to happen. It was the when.
Yes.
Make it work out for me in the best way possible.
I want to highlight something there that I think I'm hearing you say, because this is a mistake people make, or I see my clients like fall into this trap, is you make this decision to like maybe leave your job or, leave a relationship or move or whatever it might be. And it's just this reminder of you can make the decision and you get to still figure out the details. You don't have to wake up and do it the next day. Like, you don't have to walk in and quit before like getting your ducks in a row.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that there's, especially in the entrepreneur world, there's that glorification of just jump and build your parachute on the way down. And I will tell you, I was guilty at one point of putting up, I'm sure I've put that post out on Instagram and I felt good about it at the time, but that wasn't true. And I think that, you don't have to do that.
Yeah. And it's kind of different too of what position you're in, right? Somebody who already has a nice padding, where you're not actually building the full parachute, versus someone who's like, I have no money in the bank and I have 3 kids to feed. Like, don't jump without having a parachute. That's a really bad idea.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to be practical and also say, I have responsibilities.
Yes.
The bank doesn't care if I don't pay back my loan. They care. And they're going to do what they need to do to make sure I pay my bills. And also, do you have responsibilities? Do you have children?
Yeah.
And all of that factors in, and that's okay. But
yes.
the meeting your soul and saying, okay, we're going to do this, and we don't have to jump off the cliff to make it happen.
I love that. Yes, exactly. Now, speaking of jumping off cliffs here, jumping off cliffs, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was to talk about fear.
Yes.
And because I think it is it's just such a fascinating topic. And I think it's one that's really misunderstood. And it's one that I wanted to hear from someone who just knows a whole lot more about it, because it's not one that it's like one that I want to explore more. So I'm excited to learn more here. And so, but what I see as like a broad level thing happening is when we understand the nervous system and really understand how these different states can affect us, what I see people take it to mean is that, fear is something that's bad, so I should avoid it. Like, it's harmful for my nervous system. My nervous system has a response to it, and therefore I should avoid it. And I see that a lot in the chronic pain world of like, I'm scared of that movement, so therefore I should take the fear as a sign to stop. But we know that doesn't work. But there's got to be a balance, right? Like, where do you push yourself too much? And so anyway, we could probably talk about just those things the whole rest of the time. But I'd love to hear, maybe let's actually talk about the science just quickly. Like, most people on here understand the nervous system as a whole, but like, let's go into how does fear impact the nervous system?
So fear is a sign. It's a signal. It's a signal from your brain and your nervous system. It's designed to keep you safe. It's an alert system, and it's just to get you to take notice, really.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can think of it in those simple terms, that it's just your nervous system taking in all of the data around you, which is also far more than we can consciously be aware of. And it's just signaling to you, there's something here to pay attention to. And that's it. It's not telling you exactly what to do with that fear. And then the other part of it is depending upon where you are, sometimes your fear is warning you, and because of how you've developed, you might have a more intense fear reaction to something that isn't as much of a threat because of your experience over time and how your brain has wired in response to that particular experience. It was super bad for you when you were younger, and there's a reason why your brain has decided, well, we don't want to go down that path again. It's just trying to keep you safe, but you get to process what that fear means and how you want to respond to it. And also, sometimes you have I like to say it in regular terms, you have a knee-jerk response to the fear, and you have a chance to, you're not being hijacked really by your fear, but you may be having an automatic response to it that you can interrupt, even if you're already into the fear response and the habitual response you have from the past.
Okay, I love this interruption piece because I think this is so important. What I feel like harp on all the time with my clients is they come and they're like, oh, well, I was doing so well and then this thing happened and I felt my nervous system get like hijacked. And I'm like, yeah, and so we all do. Like every day I have a response that I was like, oh, that wasn't the response I want to keep having. And so therefore I will shift it, or I will pause and be like, what's going on here? Yeah. And it's just this reminder of it's not... The knee-jerk reaction happens so instantaneously that, yes, over time, there is absolutely opportunity that it will shift. But to me, I'm like, that's just a side effect. It should never be the like, this is what I need it to shift, or I need to like never have this response, because like that's a bold outcome to shoot for. And then if it's not happening, then we make ourselves wrong. And then just reinforce the response. And I love this reminder, if you get to just interrupt the response.
At any point, you could be into that response for an hour and then take the moment and go, oh, wait. When you have that moment where you're able to say, okay, I don't want to continue on this path. Is it even necessary? Is it necessary? Is this really the threat that my body feels like it is? It might not be. And to look at it that way. And in fairness to everyone who's listening to this, we have received a lot of messages, and I have been doing this. I didn't say this earlier, but I have been coaching and consulting with people on their personal and professional development for over 20 years. And so I've seen a lot in the field and what's out there in personal development, and a lot of it is lately, in the last, I would say even 10 years, is your fear is a liar. You should be fearless. And we've received those messages and internalized them, while successful people just do it in spite of their fear and things like that. And they get messages that fear is super negative rather than the gift that it is. And if you can shift that fear can be a gift as a messenger. And it doesn't have to be fear is a liar. No, it's not a liar. You just get to decide what you're going to do in response to the fear that it's sending you a message. That's it.
Yes. And I know you were talking about these, like the fearlessness bands that people will wear. It's like, what do you think of things like that and that message? Like, what do you think it does for people?
I think it's harmful. I think it ignores your humanity. I like to call it bumper sticker psychology. I think with all of the memes and the quote posts and things like that, it's easy to throw out a one-liner that sounds great in the moment. But when you're facing a real situation in your life and you're dealing with your nervous system and your emotions and your humanity, that's part of what sends you down that self-judgment, self-critical path that is improper. I think that we need to bring a bit of humanity back to things like fear. You will never see me tell someone that they need to be fearless. Ever. I think fearlessness is ridiculous. I was telling you before we started recording that I gave a lecture to law students recently, and that was a huge aha moment for them and really a gift. If someone and I said, don't tell me that you're fearless, because lawyers, like a lot of other type A people, people who are working really hard, they will put on that armor and that mask. I'm not afraid of anything. And I said, as soon as you've told me that, I don't care if you're the CEO of a company. I don't care if you're the number one anything on the planet. If you tell me that you're fearless, I know that you haven't come to terms with your humanity around it, and you haven't been able to accept that it's just normal and a beautiful part of who you are is to experience fear on occasion.
Yes. This coming back to humanity piece, oh gosh, it's like, I feel like it is so, almost like ironically lost in today's messaging, because I feel like so much is about, like, it's like at a superficial level, they're like, oh, be a human. But then it's like the messaging is like telling people to do the exact opposite in this really like sneaky, sly way. And I don't think most people do it intentionally by any means. But it really is this messaging of like, oh, if you are experiencing these emotions, there's something wrong with your nervous system.
Right.
Versus being like, oh, this makes sense. And if this response happens to be getting in the way of doing what you want to be doing, there's actually things you can do about it. So you don't need to be stuck there, or it doesn't need to prevent you, right? But it's like, if somebody wants to learn how to swim and they feel fear, if that's something you care about and you feel strongly about, there's things you get to do about it.
Yes.
Versus, I think sometimes this messaging is unintentionally is giving people like, oh, well, my body's being like, oh, nope, I shouldn't learn how to do this. There's something that's wrong. And if I do that, I'm going to stress out my nervous system even more. And it's like, well, you get to decide. One, do you care about swimming, right? Like, is that something you actually want to do? And if no, then who cares? If it is, then you have an opportunity to learn how to be with the fear and move forward into this thing that you care about.
Absolutely. And to put in guardrails, safety nets for yourself. I love the example of swimming. I usually go to speaking because I was a speaker and some people are afraid of speaking, but many people very easily say, yeah, I'm never getting on a stage. But swimming is one where there's a little bit more, it's socially, you want to swim, you might feel like, or for safety purposes, do I learn how to swim? Those kinds of things. So I think more people have some fear around it, especially if they're into adulthood and they don't know how to swim. But there are safety things that you can do in response to the fear. And the fear, it's healthy. If you don't know how to swim and you are in the ocean or in a pool where it's too deep, your life is threatened. So it's an appropriate response. It is, and again, that goes back to the messaging. It's a warning sign that this is something that you could do that could harm you. You could drown. So what are you going to do in response to that? Well, maybe you're going to you're going to take lessons. You're going to hire a coach to teach you how to swim. You're going to get some form of, a life vest if you're going to get into a boat, something like that, until you have mastered it and you feel better. And even then, you probably need a life vest if you're on a boat.
Yeah, exactly. Always a good thing to. And as you're saying that swimming example too, or like going into that more, what is coming up for me is also remembering to ask yourself of like, what am I really scared of? Because in this, right, it's so easy to be like, well, of course I'm scared of swimming. I could drown. But it's like, is that really? It might be, right? That makes sense. I think we all jump to kind of the obvious one, which might be there. But I think sometimes when you start to ask people, it's actually, well, no, I'm not scared of the drowning because I trust that I'm in a pool where I can just stand up. Or, you know what I mean? They're doing it in like a safe environment. I'm scared of being laughed at by other people in the pool. And then all of a sudden you're dealing with something so different, right? Same thing with speaking. I'm sure it's the same thing of like, what actually is the fear about, and getting really curious of like, what is the scenario where it's like, oh no, if that happened, then that's why I can't do it. It's like, are you scared of peeing your pants on stage in front of everyone? Or are you scared of messing up your words, right? Like how you would work through those scenarios would be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that fear of embarrassment and really digging deep and digging underneath to figure out what it is that's causing you to feel like you can't do something. And I think embarrassment, fear of of putting yourself out there is a really difficult one for people. And it might bring up shame from the past. It can bring up things like perfectionism. If I'm not perfect, I'm not going to do it. I need to be a master immediately. And that's, I think that there's a lot about that. I think a lot of people think that they have to be amazing at things. And I know, and by the way, me too.
Yes. You're in good company here.
I started doing this thing for myself a few years ago where I would pick something to do on purpose that I would not allow myself to try to be amazing at.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really fun. It like released me from that particular kind of fear, that fear of what if people laugh at me and what if they think I'm not very good. And it was almost like desensitizing myself to feeling that way. Like, no, I get to go and be, I'm a terrible bowler. I don't bowl very well. There's also axe throwing is like a fun activity. People love to do it. I just don't. I'm there for the friends, not the bullseye.
I think I tried that once. I was not good at it either.
Not good. And I don't ever have to be.
Yeah. And I love that because it's like it's the desensitization piece that's so important, right? It's not that right? It's like I think some people will go about, oh, I must, in order to get over this fear, I have to be so good so I never experience embarrassment versus actually desensitizing yourself to embarrassment.
Yeah.
And being really bad at something is actually the way more bang for your buck way to work through that one.
It'd be a lot more fun.
Way more fun. And also, how could you ever possibly get good at something if you don't let yourself try and be bad at it?
Yes.
If you wanted to get good at it.
And yet that's not the message. I mean, that's not the message that's out there. Well, I shouldn't say that's not the message that's out there. I think there are some people out there that you can make mistakes, let yourself fail, all of those kinds of things. But I think it's really embedded for a very long time. You have to be amazing.
Yes.
And you have to be amazing at everything that you're going to put out there in order for you to be valuable even. And that's craziness.
And I think we see it too, because I think with social media, that messaging, even if there's someone that's like, make mistakes and do all that stuff, which is great, because I do think that it exists. Mm-hmm. You then turn around and see someone being torn apart for making one tiny mistake, right? Like, oh, that person said this one thing, or, you know, that person wore something that was, oh, we didn't like it, or
yes,
whatever it might be. And so it's like you're now witnessing on social media, or maybe you even are a part of it on social media, where you are judging the crap out of someone, or you're just seeing someone be judged for making a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't even a mistake. You're just being straight up judged for being themselves, right?
Right. What was she thinking? And maybe she loved, what was she thinking for what she was wearing? Like as if that was the worst possible critical error a person can make.
Yeah.
And rather than sitting there and saying, well, I don't like that, I wouldn't wear that, but good for her.
Mm-hmm.
Letting it go. Like not even wasting your energy on that.
Right. Exactly. Or you'll see it when people like will pull like a sound clip, right, from someone that they're having in a conversation like this in a podcast where it's like things are free flowing, right? Like in our conversations with people, we all say things. I'm pretty sure we can all know that if every conversation we had that was recorded and someone took sound bites and posted it on the internet, oh my God, it'd be canceled in half a second. Like,
absolutely.
Because we need to be able to, one, have conversations that are not being analyzed by people, because that's how we are as people.
Yes.
And even in conversations, we're like, I am recording this right now, and someone could probably pull a soundbite of something I said that's, one, taken out of context, or taken out of the context of who I am. You know, because I think I see that is sometimes like what they said is like, oh, or what I'm saying is like, oh, I believe that thing. And when you know nothing else about the person, it makes them look really bad. But then when you get to know their wholeness and why they said that, why they stand for, all of a sudden you're like, oh, that makes so much sense with everything else.
Absolutely.
And I think this, though, leads to so much more. At least for me, I know I notice it in myself of like, I am fearful at times to put things out. I mean, I'm fearful a lot of times to put things out of there because I'm like, oh, if someone doesn't understand what else I'm about, or they haven't seen me say this or this piece,
Yes.
this could get misconstrued. But on Instagram, you get like 60 seconds to talk. Like, I can't sit here and tell you my whole entire life philosophy in a sound clip.
That's right. That's interesting. I don't know if you say I got, but I just recently got slammed on social media because I used the word healing, and it went in like, prove that you're a healer. And I was like, yo, that's not what I said. Wow. They knew I was a healer, and it was, are you going into hospitals? Are you healing people? And then even that, so it's funny. So bring it back to fear. There was a moment where I had that rising in me too. Immediately, like, what did other people? I started going down that path, and my thought process started going down that path, and I felt a little sick to my stomach. Do people think that I'm talking about myself in that way? What does this mean? All of that kind of stuff. And then I did the interrupt. Okay, I'm going to interrupt myself right now. I'm going to delete that comment. Yes. It's a conversation that's not worth having. It's not what I meant. This is not worth my energy. And it was just very, very simple. It was simple enough. And then there's times where I've had people take things out of context and I've let it sit. I one time I think it was during the pandemic, I was being a little snarky, but I wrote the word excellence is easy. Like I did that on a post, and people went berserk. I had hundreds of comments. Some people were agreeing and some people weren't, but they didn't understand in the context of what I was trying to say, just like you said, what I meant by that. And what I meant by that is excellence is, and if I had extended it, excellence is easier than perfectionism. That is what I meant by it. But people went crazy. And I let it sit because the conversation was worthwhile having once I got over the fact that there were people who were letting people just rip me to shreds.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think it's so interesting, right? Because anytime you see a post that just flares up your system, it's always like, why? What is this about? Right? And sometimes it's like, oh, this person's just wrong, and I'm pissed that you're enforcing this information, right? Because I'll see posts like that where I'm like, that's literally the science does not support what you're saying, and the research doesn't support. And now I'm pissed that you're putting out misinformation, so I'll be mad about it. But other times there is some gold in there of, oh, this is hitting all the spots in me, right, that are looking to hear something different.
And I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel that a few days later while I'm out on a walk. Oh, well, maybe that was more about me.
Absolutely. It is always. It's right. It's after I will be stewing about it, or I gotta vent about it, or think about it, and then you're like, got it. I feel like we have no room anymore to have that pause. Everything is so quick, react, and then it's move on, next thing. Right? And so it's if you're constantly scrolling, and then it's the next thing, and it's the next thing that you're getting outraged about, then there's no room to actually just sit and have that space to be like, let me let that simmer.
Absolutely. No question. I love pause. We don't get enough of it.
We don't. We really don't. And I also think we don't allow people to be where they're at on their journeys too. And I can see sometimes where there's certain posts out there where it's they trigger them up my system. And I'm there are ones where I'll now be I'm going to get that in 2 years. I'm not, I can see where they're going with it, and I'm not anywhere near that mindset, but I can see that's kind of a goal, and I'm going to give myself so much space to get there, because it's I know I know where I am.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really important self-awareness, and to even just think about that might be, yes, that's where I want to be. Or even the other way too.
Yes.
No need for me to go in and correct.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes that's what people are doing as well. They go in and they try to correct someone where they're earlier on their journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've just really started looking into. So your platform is so much about the nervous system, and that's being talked about, thank goodness, a lot more. But for many people, it's still a brand new concept.
Yeah.
And if they start talking about it, but they're not as fully versed in the material or how it applies to them, they might say something that might be, not fully fleshed out.
Yeah.
And there's also, you can let someone be with that.
Exactly. I see it. I feel like, do you have kids?
I do. I have 2 teenagers.
Okay. So I feel like I have a almost 7-year-old, and I had to, do a whole apology to my sister, a formal apology. I mean, formal in air quotes, apology to my sister, probably when my kid was like 4, to be like, wow, I was so judgmental of you when I did not have children. Or I was so judgmental of your parenting. And it's like, I see this now, every now and then I'll get like served up somebody with a newborn of like, here's how I'm going to do. And I'm like, sure, honey, sure, that's what you're going to do. And you know what? You get to keep thinking that. And I don't need to come in and correct you because I was there too and I get it. And it'll shift because you don't need to know the next thing yet because you're not there yet.
Yeah. Yes.
Or same thing with these like 20-year-old like fitness influencers, right? I have no issue with like, maybe some of our, millennials that are kind of making fun of them like kindly, right? Like just joshing them in the background, right? Don't go and attack them on their page. Like, no, they don't know any better because they are 20. And yes, they do get to do whatever they want and look amazing and have perky little butts and boobs and like have zero issue. And they get to enjoy the shit out of that because guess what? I did too.
Yes. Yes.
Don't take it away from them. Let them.
I mentioned I used to own a gym at one point.
Yeah.
And I owned my gym in so I was in my 40s. I'm almost 51. And it's so interesting that I'm now in a stage of life where menopause, fun topic, is in my world. And when I look back at things that I said, and I feel bad about some of the things that I said. Okay. Well, I'm older and I can do this and you can still do this when you're older. Yes, but now I have a different context.
Yes.
About there are things that are shifting biologically for me, and that means the way that I do things are different. And honoring that as well. And so I love what you're saying about honoring all the stages and recognizing, there are some people who, I think it's like 15% of women in particular, will not really experience any of the symptoms.
Wow.
Pause. And so that's cool. And congratulations if you're not going to be someone. But I think there's also that. So it's not only the stage, but recognizing that we could be in exactly the same stage and have a very different experience as well. Yeah. Give people the compassion for letting them have their experience, which might be different from your own.
Yes, exactly. Because that's what makes humans human, right? Is that we're all so different. And we all bring, this is something that I'm like, have really been, I think, seeping into, is like, we all bring this little bit of like magic into the world.
Yes.
And then it's like, and I think about this a lot in terms of like, what does that mean for an Instagram front business, right? Like somebody who's bringing in this one message. And we'll just go with fitness just because it's an easy one, right? So if their special sauce is fitness, right? Then it's like, and they're running a business. It's like all they're going to post about is fitness, right? And then they're going to have probably a very consistent message that they're sharing. It doesn't mean that that's all they're about and that's all they do. And then you need to have, and even if they're someone who's like, I do these exercises, like I have a 20-minute morning routine, and then I do I have a 20-minute wake up routine, and then I get up from my desk and I have like another 30-minute like mobility thing, and then I do my workout. Like maybe their like routine is insane, like in terms of your life, but it's like they get to have that because that's what they bring and it's amplified. But you get to just take the bits and pieces and the little magic that they're sharing and bring it into your life, when maybe that just means you have 15 minutes a day that you move, right? But it's like they kind of are showing this really big overview amplification of it.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you need to do it in that way, because then you're listening to someone else who does breath work, right? Kind of in this amplified way, and someone else who talks about nutrition in this amplified way, and someone who talks about the nervous system. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, now I have 10 hours a day filled with Instagram routines or routines that I'm supposed to do.
Right.
Just being like, oh, they're just like, it's through them that gets to be brought to the world, so they amplify it, right? That you don't have to, like, chances are it's not what they do all day either, though. Like, right. Yeah. On my Instagram, it's like I tend to only talk about chronic pain. It's like, well, I think about it a lot. I think about the nervous system all the time, but like, or I think about humanness all the time. Actually, I would really like to caveat that it's humanness, but I go out, I spend time with my kids, I do dumb shit, I do random things, you know what I mean? Like all day long, I have a very boring life where I do stuff around the house, right? It's like, that's all part of my day. You just don't see that.
Right. And there might even be things that you like that nobody knows about that get to be just yours. And especially if you are someone who happens to you have a personal brand in some way out on social media. I love the idea that you're the reminder that whoever we're following, they have a life outside of that, and that's their work, that's their message that they're sharing, and it falls within a larger scope. So I was thinking about, while you were talking a little bit, it popped in, is I think sometimes part of that, like jumping on people who have one message, sometimes is about that fear or that self-judgment that you might have that you're doing it wrong.
Yes.
And if you can point out where they're not exactly consistent with their message, or where they're not being real because they didn't share something, I think that sometimes that's actually about something more internal. If I wanted, the idea that, well, they're being too aggressive in their workouts, for example, because then if you can criticize what they're doing, then it validates what you're doing. Whereas both can exist, both can be valid for different reasons. And then that can calm down like an unnecessary or like a maladaptive, like fear response, the fear that you're not doing something well enough, or doing it the way you should, or getting it right, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's like, oh man, I think that so goes into the, like, what is the fear really about? And it's like, does the fear actually have anything to do with exercise? Or is it, I'm just fear I'm not good enough, right? Or not doing it right. What I think that is, probably about a year ago, I feel like I actually haven't talked about it much, because I feel like it's still something I'm still fleshing out for myself, is I was striving for so long through inner work to feel good enough, right? It's like, I feel like that is such a core wound for so many, like, I'm like, I don't know who doesn't sort of have that at some place, right? It's like so many things come back down to that when you really like trace down fears, is like not good enough. And so I started operating from this place of like, what if I'm not good enough? So who cares? Like, why is that such a big deal? Right? Like, what if I don't exercise good enough? What if my post kind of sucks? Like, what if I'm not saying that good enough? Like, so it's almost like being like working with that fear, like kind of with a fear of embarrassment, rather than try to be like, oh, I'm going to be so perfect so I never embarrass myself. It's kind of like, well, I'm just going to totally accept the fact that I'm not good enough. And so therefore, who cares? like, why is that such a big deal?
Who cares? Right.
Like,
that's a really great one. I love that.
Because otherwise I feel like what I found myself doing is like trying to have perfectionism around feeling good enough.
Oh my gosh.
Like it's only until I feel good enough can I say this thing, right?
Yes. It's so funny how it's all like intertwined, and then even as you were talking about it, I saw some of that in myself as well. At various times I had little like versions of me popping up, and not that I have it all together. I definitely don't. Always like nobody does. So there's always like a layer of the onion to pull back. But I love that idea. What if I can just not be good enough? So it's not I'm perfect as I am. It's almost like that slight shift in the language, because that's still embracing perfectionism.
Yeah.
I'm allowed.
I go with I'm whole. And I very much have so my, I guess, belief is right, I feel like we operate on like a spiritual plane, and then we operate on a human plane. Yeah, I very much like to work with a human plane. Like I love spirituality, but like I think there's people who work on like a far more spiritual plane, but I feel like that leads to a lot of spiritual bypassing in like the human plane. And a lot of like, oh, I'm better than you. I'm going to sit on my mountaintop and just judge everyone for fighting or for whatever. And it's like, yeah, but not everyone can sit on a mountaintop. We got to function in the human plane.
Right.
And so my belief is from like a spiritual level, we are all perfectly whole.
Of course.
Like, there's no other option. Like, you can take the worst terrorist in the world, and I'm like, they on a spiritual level, like, they are perfectly whole.
That's a tough one for a lot of people to embrace.
Yeah. But because I actually, like, really did a lot of work around that, that now I'm like, that concept's kind of boring to me. I'm like, okay, so we're all like starting from the same thing. So it's like actually to me how you show up in the human plane then is where you have a lot of play and choice and opportunity.
Right. And to go back, acknowledge the spirituality, acknowledge that you're whole, but where are you not showing up whole?
Exactly. Because also it means I think
of it.
Yeah, I think sometimes people take the spiritual concept and I'm like, I don't think you can always apply it to the human level, because if someone's showing up and being an asshole or murdering people, I'm sorry, you're being right, you're a bad person. You are showing up as a bad, it doesn't change the fact that you are spiritually whole and perfect though.
That's right. That's why we have forgiveness, apologies.
Yes. We need to. You could always come back. I feel like everyone always has the potential to find their way back to that, but like right now, like you are not living up to that at all.
What do you think about the idea that in a lot of personal development, I think that people are talking about things like they focus more just on the mindset, or they look at it like a moral failing, like a discipline kind of a scenario. So if you are not trying to be good enough, for not even good enough, if you're not trying to be amazing, you're not trying to optimize everything and perform at the very highest level, if you are not at 100% or 110%, you have some sort of moral failing. I bet this is one of the things that I've been thinking about, is this whole concept of you need to be 100%, you need to be 110%. And if you're not trying to do that in all aspects of your life, then you aren't good enough. Like there's something like morally wrong. Oh, like it goes to that level. And I feel like that kind of is like a way some people are trying to tap into the spirituality. Like if you were really whole, and I think it gets really confusing for a lot of people. What do I need to be doing to prove that I am whole?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. I think so much comes back to realizing everybody's here to bring a different message.
Sure.
And I think some people might need to lovingly check how they're bringing the message in, right? Because like I follow this one, I can't think of his name, so I can't get, but he talks about obsession. And his name is Zach. I can't remember. But I love do you know who he is, or do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't.
Okay. Anyways, I can I remember, I'll put him in the show notes and give him credit. But I haven't followed him very long. I kind of recently came across his stuff, but he just talks about being like so obsessed with one thing. And his like one thing happens to be running right now, but it's not really the lens. He does talk about running, but I don't care about running. Like, it's not what I am obsessed with at all. But he talks about being like so like into something, right? And it's this really, really intense message. Like, he's like, I won't, I'll barely sleep, I'll barely whatever. And I just obsessed. And I think had I seen that 5 years ago, I'd have been like, wow, something's seriously wrong with you. Like, you're going to crash and burn. And he totally might crash and burn. It's none of my damn business though. Right. Because when I read his posts, it lights a fire in me about, ooh, what do I really care about? Right? Again, it's like I'm taking that little piece of his message. I don't need to take it to the extreme of like, I'm not going to sleep or eat to send my message out in the world, because that's not right for me. But I'm like, I could have more of a fire around. Like, I could be more obsessed with what I do. I could put it out in the world differently or at a bigger intensity because I want to. Right? Like, his message speaks to me because I want to do that. And so I think you have these people who talk about excellence. And I think right now it's a really important message for people to hear, because I actually think as a culture, we have almost switched to the opposite of, I feel like on a very broad scale, we have a lot of apathy. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of, because excellence and perfectionism and pressure has been so big and kind of maybe not in the best, it hasn't been set in the best ways, right? It's like just burned everybody out, and now everyone's burned out from like pandemic, from like the world, from social media, and trying to figure out a world that has this like completely new way of being. I think people are like, oh, thank God, I can just like, I'm going to just latch onto the messaging that talks about rest. Not because rest isn't important, because it's extremely important, but they're not latching onto it for that reason. They're latching onto it to give themselves like a pass from actually showing up in the world, yes, as the way...
The pendulum has swung all the way to the other side.
Yeah. I really feel like as humans, we need to be pushed. But in an appropriate way for us. And that's going to look... And I work with people with chronic pain, so that might look so right to someone I'm working with who I think might need to be pushed in this lovingly gentle way might be like, walk a block today. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be this intensity, whereas someone who's operating at like what he talks about, he's like, but he might be like, his pushing himself is running 20 miles a day. But I'm like, it's what's the push for you? Because our brains are always going to pick what is comfortable and what is familiar and what takes the least amount of energy. And I think we have such like two such conflicting messages. We think a lot of clients I have grew up with very strict, hard parents, at least I did, who really, really pushed them in ways, and then they didn't have a soft place to land in that push. Sure. There was no grace in it. There was no compassion in it. It was like, for me, it was like I brought home a 99%. I was like, why didn't you get the 100%? Right? There was no like, oh, we're proud of you. Like there was a complete lack of that.
Right.
And so I swung into like, oh my gosh, let myself like do the bare minimum and like love myself through that all. But now I feel like I'm entering this new phase of like, yeah, I don't want to stay there though. Like I got more to bring to the world. And like, I do need someone to light a fire under my ass and push me, because it's so much easier to just, at the end of the day, be like, I had a hard day. I'm tired. I can just watch Netflix instead of folding my laundry. You know what I mean?
It's so interesting because I definitely struggle with this in some ways, because so many of the people who come to me are in a state of like serious burnout.
Yeah.
And so the answer for that is often a rest that feels very uncomfortable for them, or an amount of time that feels very uncomfortable for them. And so I think it might be who's coming to you, like where, totally. Right? Again, so it goes back to what we were talking about before, like what stage are you at?
Yes.
So in the gym, we'll bring it back to fitness. I think it's a great, easy analogy. I've heard the phrase of your mind quits before your body does. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking to one of my partners at the time, and I said, that message doesn't apply to me because of the way that I have operated my whole life. I will push myself past those limits to injury.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think that there might even be like some self-awareness of where are you at? Are you someone who always pushes past limits and that's been your habit? That's what you've done just to survive and to function? Mm-hmm. Then maybe backing off a little bit more is the right message, at least for some time. But then like you said,
totally.
like, at what point is it that you go, oh yeah, now I'm ready to start going again? Mm-hmm. Like at what point have you powered down enough to be able to power back up? And I think that that's not always like the easiest to do without some guidance. Like you were even saying the language, I don't know if you caught it, but you were saying like, I need somebody to like light the fire or something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to hire a person, but it might mean listening to the podcast from the guy who is obsessed. Or I always think of, in my world, David Goggins. Are you familiar with him?
Oh, I know the name, but I can't place it.
Yeah, he's a Navy SEAL. He doesn't have a podcast. He actually very rarely goes on a podcast. Mm-hmm. He's very interesting, but he's done these crazy endurance races. He ran with stress fractures on his leg, and his message is always like, you can keep going. Mm-hmm. And I both love parts of his message and mm-hmm. also think parts of his message are really harmful. And
totally.
And I don't, so I like, where I've grown to at this point is that I'm looking for sustainability. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes that might mean that I'm going to go harder and I might be to 100%. And sometimes there might be an 80%. And 80% is great. And I remember reading somewhere that most of the people who are really, really successful, they're averaging out to about 85%.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important. I think I talk about this with balance too, of like, balance doesn't mean every single day you're perfectly balanced. It's like, yeah, it's like maybe you went super hard. You know, it's like I'm like a procrastinator. So it's like leading up to like a webinar, if I'm giving a talk, right? I'm like pounding it out like the day beforehand. But then like probably the day after it, or if it's a morning thing, right? It's like I'm probably doing jack shit for the rest of the day because, and I'm not someone who would like to make it very clear to everyone listening, is I am not someone who defaults to overdoing things. And this is where I think what you said is the self-awareness piece. I am so the person that my mind quits before my body. And I know that about myself though. Like I am so the like, okay, I'm tired. I'm more likely to fall into that camp than the overworking camp because I don't think that was, I don't know. I really can't actually decide if that was always true for me or not, but I kind of think it was. I came from like two insanely hardworking, overworking parents. And I think I just swung the opposite way. I was like, I don't ever want to do this. This is insane. And so like, I've never been like a hardcore overworking. It doesn't mean I don't work hard at times, right? But like, I remember even in college, right? It's like if I had a big test and I knew I needed to study, I'm always like, no, sleep's more important than studying. Like I'm like, I will get more out of having a good night's rest than like I was just always like that. I would probably be the person who like stuck my like book under my pillow and was like, hopefully I'll absorb some stuff, right? Like, so I think the self-awareness piece is by far the most important piece. Yeah, because if you don't have self-awareness of who you are, there are people who are like, who might be like you, Jen, who are totally, they can go push way past and into injury, but they are still so hard on themselves that they think that they're being weak, right? It's like that they don't have that awareness. Or there's people like me who, and I see this on some of my clients, and I get both sides. I get both sides of people, and the advice I give is, and not the advice, because I don't like sit here and give advice, right? Like where their body's guide to go is polar opposite, but it's right for them. But it's like I have people who think that they are overdoing it, and they're not. Like what they are doing is completely safe and acceptable and within their body's capacity. And And we look at the whole, like, right, I'm sitting down one-on-one to help people. This is not done in one session. This is like over time we are evaluating this. And it's like, yeah, you're really not overdoing it. Your body is recovering it exactly as it should. That soreness you feel is in the exact right places, is completely normal for that workout.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you overdid it. But if somebody has fear around soreness or is super sensitive to their body's sensations, they might think that that's wrong.
Yes.
So there's just, it's a self-awareness, but also I think a lot of times if you've been disconnected from your body, you need help with the self-awareness. At least I sure as hell did.
So that's so interesting that you say that. So you see maybe I'm putting words in your mouth.
Oh no, say what you think.
You see the disconnection from your body as making people hold themselves back more?
Mm-hmm.
So my personal experience,
both.
Because my personal experience for myself, and even when I was in the gym and I would watch people, there were people, it's funny now that we're talking about it, I can now see the spectrum. The people that know you can do more, you can absolutely do more. And then there were those, like, it's time for a break. You've now been in the gym 7 days and for 3 weeks, and on 3 of those days every week you've done a double, so you're not allowed back.
Yes, seriously.
Go home. Go. You're not allowed to be here. And I will also say for myself, it was the same thing. I absolutely need people in my life who will lovingly tell me it's time for you to take a bigger break than you think that you need, because you're actually harming yourself. And so I know that you know, obviously this is the, the chronic, a podcast about chronic pain. We didn't even talk about any of that. But there have been times in my life that I have had pain, physical pain. And what's interesting for me is I'm one of those people who doesn't really connect to the pain. So that when I have pain, I'm like, oh no, do I need to go to the hospital? Because I shouldn't have pain. And so I have, and I don't know, I haven't been able to like completely unwind that. But one of my business partners was a physician, and he would comment that it's a little bit surprising how long you can go under clear physical pain without acknowledging it. So I'm on that spectrum, in that zone. And that had, I will also say for anyone who's listening, that's not something that's not good. I'm not talking about it like it's good or wearing it like it's a badge of honor. I continue to pay the price for some of the injuries that I've caused to myself. And I also too know that some of the overdoing over the overs, any of them has impacted me in with some health conditions as well over time.
People, I think it's such a spectrum, and like knowing where you are on that spectrum. And I think I love how you're like having someone else come in and be like, you need a rest, because sometimes you really need that like objective evaluation of ourselves, because we aren't always good at it. And you said something about like when you were asking you find people who are disconnected from their bodies are actually, I see a lot of people who have disconnection from their bodies and underdo it, right? It's like I see people who have disconnection from their body and overdo it, absolutely. But I think what people mistake a connection to their bodies, in the way I mean it, is you're connected to yourself, like your own body's wisdom is not the same as being connected to every sensation and feeling your body feels.
Got it.
Because it goes right back into the fear conversation of there are people who I think really are like, and I think I'm one of them, I'm like very hypersensitive and hyper aware of feelings in my body, right? So if like fear comes in, it's like, it's a very intense feeling for something that is mismatched. So what I have had to learn is like, it's mismatched, right? Like, yes, this feels intense in my body, but I can then, right, it's like saying, oh, this is a big fear isn't where the connection stops, right? Could be very connected to the intensity of the feeling, but disconnected to like the wisdom behind it.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I've ever like thought about it quite in that way. So that's actually helpful for me.
I don't know that I've ever thought about it that way either. I love that.
It's like we can be very connected to the sensations, right? Like soreness is a great example. In chronic pain, and I saw this all the time in the clinic, people would be like, but there's pain here. And I, maybe we'd be doing like a glute bridge. And I'm like, where's the pain? And they would point to their butt. I'm like, but that's not like, that's a muscle contraction, right? And again, these are people I'm seeing, and it's like in every exercise, right? They'd be doing a step up. Oh, my quad hurts. And it's like, they're pointing to their muscle bellies. And it's like, that's not really like, right. Like that's what you're feeling, or what you are reacting to is the sensation of your muscles contracting. And even if it is more intense for that person, because obviously I can't experience what they're feeling, it's a safe place to be feeling that because it's appropriate for what you're doing. It makes perfect sense. And you're doing like a step up and you have sharp shooting pain in your knee. That's right. we want to check that out a little differently.
Yeah.
But it's like we can be very connected to the sensations, both physically and emotionally, our body is sending to us, but we have to know how to interpret them through our body's wisdom. And I think that's the piece a lot of people are missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I'd like to that you were bringing into like the emotion versus the physical.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what we're talking about is too like how it's showing up physical, but like the fear about other emotions too might be up as well. So that comes in. I know. So for me, I have such a high tolerance. And like for me personally, I had a very high tolerance for physical pain.
Mm-hmm.
And virtually no tolerance for emotional.
Yes.
Like the other direction. And then I certainly see that with my clients as well. Like when they're coming to me for whatever it is that they're coming to me, that they will also have, they'll have something similar, or they might be able to be more, turned on as well. Like there can be like an opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to feel the physical more than the emotional, or vice versa. And then how fear comes in to play with that. And sometimes that fear, you just don't want to feel it. So sometimes our behaviors are more about how can I minimize my exposure to this feeling. So I think actually the overdoing and the perfectionism that a lot of people have is because they fear the negative emotions that they might feel, like embarrassment. So perfectionism, for example, or overdoing is really about avoiding feeling emotions.
Totally. Oh, yes. I think that is such a huge, huge, important piece. We just like resist and fear feeling certain things.
Yes.
So much, yeah.
It could be even people who resist feeling grief, or resist feeling the embarrassment, like I said, or resist feeling frustration. That's when I think they go into like toxic positivity sometimes, or resist feeling anger, right? Especially because anger is treated as so like such a negative emotion that you don't even want to experience anger. And again, that goes back to, I guess, that like underlying theme that we've been talking about the whole time. It's about being human.
Yes.
Right. So, I just thought perfectionism is about trying to deny your humanness.
Oh, so good. Yeah.
And I'm a recovering perfectionist. So
same.
And if you continue on that path, I do think it shows up. I do think you get warning signs. If you refuse to acknowledge your emotions, just like me, my first physical like manifestation of something was happening and I was ignoring. I was like trying not to feel and trying to be perfect. Started with the uncontrollable eye twitch that I couldn't stop when I was, and I was like, "What is happening here?" And I will also be honest that I think that some of the lack of sleep was a good contributor to that. It wasn't just the denying emotions.
It's all linked, though, right?
Absolutely. And so I do think that the attempt to not feel emotions is a huge player. And we fear, and because fear is an emotion too, but we fear the emotion, the other emotions.
Oh, totally. I love talking about layers, and it's like there's fear of the shame, of the guilt, right? It's like, and I'm always like, where, like, go back, keep going to like, which is the layer you can be like, okay, I can be here. And you just got to start there.
And it's like, and that fear is like buddies with judgment.
Oh my God.
And judgment, come along for the ride.
Totally. Oh, I love thinking of like of emotions as like little people. So I love that you said like buddies. It's like linking arms. Like it's so true.
There's that great Pixar movie. I'm blanking on what it's called. And
Inside Out.
Inside Out. I loved that movie. It was so good.
It's so good. I like bawl every single time. It's like you need them all.
You do.
You need the sadness with the joy.
That's right. And the anger.
Yes.
You need the anger. You need all of it. And you do need the fear. I mean, to just bring it back full circle, you need the fear.
Yes. Otherwise, you jump off cliffs without a bungee cord.
Right? It's you need the fear. The fear is a gift. The fear is a messenger. The fear is there to help guide you like on your path to like the next part. And sometimes it's legitimately there to protect you. I love that we have those moments. When I look in my life too, that the hair stands up on the back of your neck. And what actions did I take in that moment because I chose to honor that fear in that moment? And how did I save myself in ways I don't even know? It's probably happened countless times.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You can't even begin to know sometimes because your body reacts so quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I love to see fear, is that fear is a gift, and I would never want to be fearless.
Mm-hmm. I think that is such a perfect place to end. Such a powerful message. If you want to tell if you want to tell people where they can find you and maybe see more about your work, feel free to share that, and I'll put things in the show notes as well.
Sure. One of the best places to find me right now is on LinkedIn at Jennifer Grosso. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also find me, I'm not on there as much, but Instagram, jengrosso.co. You can find me there. And my company name, which I realized I never said, is the Bold Fire Institute. And we love to help people. We love to help people grow and to help them avoid a lot of the stress and burnout. And our work is very, very well-being focused. So I just love the opportunity to have this kind of a conversation with you today because it's so much about being well. And I appreciate you and the work that you do. And I love your podcast. So thank you so much for having me here.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being here. This was such a great conversation.